The forest had gone quiet. Not silent, not quite, but quiet in the kind of way that made people stop walking, the kind of quiet that pressed against your skin and made your breath feel loud. A fog had settled low over the southern slopes of Mount Ashland, clinging to pine trunks like a secret. It was early autumn. The leaves had only just begun to turn, small flecks of amber and crimson brushing the edges of green. The air carried the sharp tang of cedar and moss, stirred only by the occasional flutter of wings. A squirrel darted across a fallen log and disappeared, and, somewhere beneath the undergrowth, a child's whistle slept in the dirt. Thomas Hale, a veteran park ranger with 31 years of service, was following a narrow trail no wider than his boot. It was an old maintenance path, overgrown and long abandoned, and it wasn't on any map handed out to hikers. Most locals didn't even know it existed. The forest had a way of covering its past. He moved slowly, pushing back branches, the weight of his pack shifting with each step. He wasn't here for tourists. This was a request from the Forest Service to resurvey trails from the early 2000s, areas lost to erosion, to time, to memory. Thomas paused, resting one hand against the rough bark of a Douglas fir. He narrowed his eyes toward a clearing just ahead. The trees opened like parted curtains. For a moment he thought he heard something, rustle, a click, but it was gone. Then he saw it. At first it looked like nothing, just a break in the soil. But Thomas's eyes had grown used to spotting the unnatural in nature. This wasn't erosion, this was deliberate. A circle of disturbed earth, small, careful, as if something had been placed and buried long ago. He crouched, brushing aside wet needles and brittle leaves. His fingers met something smooth. Plastic. No, silicone, worn soft by age. A child's whistle, faded blue, almost gray now. Thomas stared. He didn't move. He remembered this whistle. 18 years ago, a boy named Jacob Donnelly had gone missing from Camp Larkspur, just a few miles uphill. It had been the final week of July 2000, the hottest summer the town of Ashland could remember. Jacob had been 9 years old, small for his age, quiet. He'd vanished during an overnight hike. The search had lasted 6 days. Volunteers, dogs, helicopters, nothing. The only thing ever found was a single sock. No prints, no blood, no body, no answers. And now, this whistle, buried beside the same trail that had been sealed off that August and never reopened. Thomas's hands trembled. He brushed away more soil and uncovered a frayed leather strap, beads threaded through it, some of them loose. Blue, white, and a single red one in the center. It looked handmade. A bracelet. His mind reeled back to the press conferences, the interviews, the photographs, the image of Jacob holding up a string of beads for the camera during craft day. Same colors, same order. He stood, unsteady. The wind picked up, shaking the trees just enough to whisper. Then came the sound that didn't belong, a creak, deep and wooden, like something heavy shifting on old hinges. It came from just beyond the tree line, down where the slope dipped sharply and the forest thickened. Thomas turned. "Hello?" he called. No answer, only that creak again, like a door opening. And then silence. Not even birdsong. He looked down at the bracelet in his hand. Something was wrong. He should have left. He should have radioed it in immediately, but something held him in place, something older than logic, curiosity, or guilt. Because Thomas Hale hadn't just worked in these woods back in 2005, he'd been one of the first on the scene. And he remembered what they didn't find, what they didn't tell the press. The things he'd told himself were better left forgotten, but the forest hadn't forgotten, and neither had the boy. Behind him, a twig snapped. Thomas turned too late. A shadow moved through the trees, and then was gone. That same afternoon, 72 miles away, Claire Donnelly opened her mailbox in silence. She wasn't expecting anything. She never was, not anymore. Bills, coupons, a catalog, and one envelope with no return address. She froze. It was hand-addressed, the ink smudged slightly at the bottom. She didn't open it. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the mantel above the fireplace, where a faded photograph still stood in a silver frame. Jacob, age 9, smiling shyly, his left front tooth missing. She had taken that photo the morning he left for Camp Larkspur. It was the last one ever taken of him. She sat down slowly, her heart beating harder than it had in months. Years. She turned the envelope over in her hands. There was a faint bulge inside on paper, but something small. Claire's fingers began to shake. From somewhere far behind her, the kitchen radio played static and then clicked off on its own. She didn't even notice. She tore the envelope open. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a bead, blue, then another, white, and one red in the center. Her breath caught the bracelet. She stood, nearly knocking the chair over, and backed away from the table, as if the beads might explode. They were his. She knew they were his, and suddenly, 18 years felt like yesterday. Jacob wasn't gone. Or if he was, someone still had a piece of him. She stared out the window, her own reflection in the glass, barely visible against the gathering dark. Outside, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then steady, each drop a knock against the past she had buried. But the past had a way of knocking back. Back in the forest, Ranger Thomas Hale's radio lay on the ground where he had dropped it. The screen cracked, the static low and distant. The beads and whistle sat undisturbed beneath the tree, and a single footprint, small, too small, was pressed into the mud beside them. Fresh. Claire Donnelly's world had shrunk to a set of rituals. She woke at 6 every morning, whether she wanted to or not. Not because of an alarm, but because the body remembers. It remembers loss the way trees remember storms, twisted in shape, hollowed in places where light used to reach. The coffee always brewed at 6:05, 2 sugars, 1 cream. Always in the same mug, a white one with a fading red cartoon fox, the same fox that had been on Jacob's lunchbox. She didn't drink the coffee right away. She held the mug, let the heat anchor her. The weight was a comfort, something solid. At 6:10, she opened the top drawer of the hallway dresser and pulled out a stack of old letters. Her letters. One for every week since Jacob vanished. 938 of them, each dated, sealed, and untouched. She never reread them. That wasn't the point. She wrote to him as if he were still somewhere reachable. And now, someone had written back. The beads still sat on the kitchen table where she'd left them the night before. Blue, white, and one red. Just like the bracelet Jacob had made in arts and crafts. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even her sister, not her ex-husband. She didn't know how, because to say it out loud would mean she believed it, and Claire had trained herself for years not to believe. That was the only way to survive. The last 18 years had been about survival, about making things seem normal even when they weren't. She'd gone back to school, became an LPN, took a job at Ashland Community Hospital. Learned how to talk to patients and families with the kind of quiet empathy that didn't require explanation. People liked her. No one asked about Jacob anymore. Even the hospital staff avoided the topic, though they all knew. In a town like Ashland, everyone knew. She lived alone now, in the same craftsman-style house where she had raised Jacob. His room was still intact. The door remained closed most days, but she opened it on Sunday mornings. Dust never settled long in there. Inside, the room was frozen in time, a shelf of Goosebumps books, a space-themed comforter, posters of rockets and planets, the lava lamp he'd begged for at the school book fair. She kept it plugged in, even now. It was glowing softly. She stepped in slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the dresser. Everything was smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she had just changed, grown taller under the weight of grief. Her eyes moved to the desk. There, taped to the wall, was a drawing Jacob had made just a week before camp. A trail map, crudely drawn with marker. Stick trees, a dotted path, and a red X at the end. He'd called it Jacob's Hideout. Claire had smiled when he showed her, said it looked like treasure. He'd said, "It's where I'll go if I get scared." At the time it hadn't meant anything, just a game, a boy's imagination. Now it felt like a message. She traced the drawing with one fingertip. Her throat tightened. The knock at the door startled her. It was 7:42 a.m. No one came by at this hour. She stepped back into the hallway and opened the front door. A man in uniform stood on the porch. Tall, late 50s, tan ranger jacket, the name Hale embroidered on the chest. His eyes were bloodshot. "Claire Donnelly?" he asked, removing his hat. She nodded slowly, heart thudding. "My name is Thomas Hale. I'm with the U.S. Forest Service." He paused, clearing his throat. "I believe I've found something related to your son." Her knees went weak. She gripped the doorframe. "May I come in?" he asked gently. Inside, the kitchen was still half lit by morning sun, the beads catching the light like something sacred. Thomas stared at them for a long moment before sitting down across from her. "I was surveying a closed trail up near the Larkspur Ridge," he said. "Came across an old campsite. Looked like it hadn't been disturbed in years." Claire said nothing. "I found these buried under a flat stone near a root system. The whistle, too." He pulled a clear plastic bag from his coat and placed it gently on the table. There it was, the whistle. Claire's breath hitched. "That's his," she would. "I thought it might be." She reached out, her hand hovering over the bag, not touching it. "Where exactly?" Thomas hesitated. "Just past the switchback near Pine Drop Hollow." She blinked. "That's not where they searched," she said. "That trail was closed." "I know," he replied. "Closed the week after Jacob disappeared. The hillside was unstable, but it was also politically complicated." Claire looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Thomas shifted in his seat. "There was pressure to keep the search contained. They said the odds of him wandering off trail were low, that it would be a waste of resources." Claire's eyes narrowed. "You were there, weren't you? Back then?" Thomas didn't answer right away. Finally, he nodded. "I helped lead the initial grid search. I remember your boy. Quiet kid, liked to whistle, always carried that silly blue thing." Claire's voice was low. "Why didn't anyone find this before?" Thomas met her gaze. "Because someone didn't want it to be found." The silence between them stretched. "Mrs. Donnelly," he began, then stopped. "Claire," he nodded. "Claire?" "I need to go back up there. I didn't finish surveying the site. I thought you might want to see it." She didn't speak. "I'm not supposed to bring civilians into restricted areas," he added, "but you deserve to know." She looked down at the beads again. "I'll go." That night, Claire sat alone on her porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The wind had picked up. The trees swayed like figures in the dark. She clutched the drawing from Jacob's room. Jacob's hideout, a red X. What had he meant? Had he really created a hiding place? Could a child have survived even for a day in that wilderness? She didn't know, but someone did. The next morning she packed her old hiking boots and a flashlight. She hadn't been on a trail in over a decade. Her knees ached. Her breath came short when she climbed stairs, but she didn't care. She needed to go back. To the place where everything had stopped. To the place where she might finally start again. Ashland was a town that didn't like to talk about Camp Larkspur. It had been a beloved summer retreat for generations, a place of bonfires, canoe races, and talent shows. After Jacob disappeared, attendance dropped by 70%. Within 2 years, it shut down. But no one tore it down. It still sat there, on the eastern ridge above Bear Creek, decaying. The wooden cabins now collapsed, graffiti on the mess hall walls, windows shattered, vines growing through the raft. Claire hadn't seen it since that week in 2005. Now she was going back, and the forest was waiting. Late that night, Thomas Hale returned to the site alone. He held a flashlight in one hand and a revolver in the other. Something about the footprint from earlier had unsettled him. It had been too small, too fresh. And as he reached the edge of the old campsite, the beam of his flashlight caught something half buried in the mud. A shoe, child-sized, and inside it was a note, folded carefully. Written in pencil, smudged by water and time. One word was still visible: help. The forest greeted them like a secret they weren't meant to rediscover. Claire stepped out of the truck slowly. The tires had carved fresh prints into soft dirt, but everything else felt untouched, like the world had decided to freeze this one piece of land in 2000. The cabins of Camp Larkspur stood slumped and broken in the clearing ahead. The paint had peeled away, the roofs caved in. Pine needles layered every surface like snow. It didn't smell like decay, it smelled like memory. Thomas walked ahead with steady, cautious steps. He didn't speak. He hadn't said much since picking Claire up that morning. There was something behind his eyes, maybe guilt. But the silence suited the place. Claire moved through the path like she'd done it before. Her feet found steps that no longer existed. She paused near a wooden sign, half swallowed by moss. Mess Hall. The letters barely legible. Her breath caught. It was here that Jacob last ate lunch. They served spaghetti that day. She remembered because he hated the sauce. He'd scraped it off with a plastic fork and left a perfect circle of red on the tray. A detail no one else remembered. She closed her eyes. The air shifted. "Over here," Thomas called softly. Claire followed his voice toward a spot near the rear tree line, where the trail narrowed between two rocks. The place where he'd found the bracelet and whistle. She crouched slowly, heart hammering, eyes scanning the ground. The dirt had been disturbed again. Not by animals. Footprints. Small. Too small. Claire looked up sharply. "These weren't here before?" Thomas nodded. "I saw them the other night. I didn't want to believe they were fresh. Could be hikers. No one hikes this trail. It's closed. And those prints? They're a child's." Claire said nothing. "Come with me," Thomas murmured. "There's more." They pushed deeper into the woods. Branches scraped her arms. The cold air tightened around them. After about 30 minutes, they reached a shallow dip in the terrain, almost like a basin. The earth here was soft, littered with pine cones. A strange stillness clung to the place. Thomas raised his hand and pointed to a small rock wall carved naturally into the hillside. Claire approached, and then she saw it. Etched faintly into the stone, nearly invisible, was crude. Finger-length lines, a circle, a stick figure, a box with an X. Claire froze. "It's his," she whispered. "It's Jacob's mark." She recognized it from the map in his room. He used the same lines to show his hideout. Thomas knelt beside the rock. He pressed his palm against the cold stone. "It's been weathered, but this wasn't here 18 years ago. Someone came back." Claire stared at the X. Then something caught her eye, wedged between two stones, partly buried. She knelt and reached for it, brushing away dirt. It was a crayon, blue, still intact. Her breath vanished. He had these in his camp bag. Thomas's voice was low. "This hasn't been here long." Claire stood up, holding the crayon like evidence. "You're telling me a 9-year-old left a whistle, a bracelet, and a crayon here recently?" "I'm saying—" Thomas hesitated. "I don't know what I'm saying." They turned to go, but then heard it, a sound, faint, rhythmic, from deeper in the woods. No click. Click, click. They froze. Claire's hand gripped Thomas's sleeve. Click, like plastic tapping against wood, or a bead bracelet swinging. "Jacob?" Claire called. No answer, just wind, and then nothing. Later that afternoon, Claire returned home and did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She called Charlotte Myers, the girl who had bunked with Jacob's group during camp, the girl who, at age 9, had told counselors she'd heard Jacob crying outside that. No one believed her. Now 27, Charlotte lived in Seattle, worked as a photo archivist, and hadn't spoken to Claire since the week of the disappearance. Claire left a message. Charlotte called back 5 hours later. "Hello?" Claire said, her voice tight. "Hi, it's me." Claire's breath caught. "Thank you for calling." There was a long pause on the line. "I kept the journal," Charlotte said softly. Claire's heart stopped. "What?" "My camp journal, from 2005. I didn't let my mom throw it out." "Does it mention Jacob?" Another silence. Then Charlotte said, "I wrote down what I saw that night." Claire sat down. Charlotte's voice dropped to a whisper. "I never told anyone this, but someone else was out there that night. I saw a flashlight. It wasn't a counselor." "Who?" "I don't know. They were tall, wearing something, not a uniform, like a black coat. I heard them say his name." Claire's eyes filled. "You heard Jacob's name?" Charlotte whispered. "He answered them." Silence on both sides of the call, and then Charlotte said something that made Claire stand up. "I got something in the mail this week." "What?" "A drawing. On lined notebook paper. It was folded and blank on the outside, just left on my doorstep." "What was the drawing?" Charlotte's voice cracked. "A trail map with a red X." Claire almost dropped the phone. That night, Claire opened the box of letters again. She pulled out the one marked July 31st, 2005, the day Jacob went missing. She had written, "If you're out there, if you're hiding, I understand. You were scared. You didn't mean to run. I'll always look for you, Jacob, even if no one else will." She held the paper to her chest. Then her phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't recognize. It was a photo, a close-up of Jacob's bracelet, resting on a tree stump. The message had no location, no explanation, just the image. Claire stared at it, her mind reeling. The photo was recent, she could tell by the lighting, and the tree stump. There was something carved into it. 3 letters, WJD, Jacob's initials, William Jacob Donnelly. She ran to the desk drawer and pulled out the camp registration form from 2005. It was there. He'd signed it at the bottom, the same initials, WJD, the same angle, the same crooked line on the J. This wasn't a replica. This was his. She forwarded the image to Thomas. He replied in less than a minute. "Where did this come from?" Claire didn't answer. She didn't know, but someone did. Meanwhile, Thomas had been staring at something he hadn't looked at in almost 2 decades. His own field notebook from the week Jacob vanished. He flipped past the search maps, the checklists, the names of volunteers, until he reached one page, written in pencil. "Northside Ridge search incomplete. Area compromised by request. Entry denied." He remembered now. Someone, a superior from Salem, had ordered them to avoid the area near Pine Drop Hollow. No reason given, no paperwork filed, just a verbal order. Now he couldn't shake the feeling that the entire search had been compromised from the beginning. He closed the notebook. Something about this felt engineered, not accidental. He pulled open a drawer and took out a manila envelope labeled "Confidential." Inside was a photo, taken in August 2005. Aerial view of the ridge. In the bottom corner of the photo, a black coat, too far away to make out a face. But it wasn't a ranger uniform, and it wasn't camp staff. Thomas stared at the coat. His hands began to shake. At 2:17 a.m., Claire woke to a noise outside. She stepped to the window. On the porch, resting on the mat, was something new. Not a package, not a letter, a pair of shoes, child-sized, caked in mud, and next to them, a Polaroid photo. It showed the shoes, on someone's feet. Standing in the exact same place, her porch. But the photo was old, faded, as if it had been taken years ago. A handwritten message at the bottom. "I was here." Claire didn't sleep the night the shoes appeared. She sat by the door until sunrise, the Polaroid in one hand, the shoes in the other. The photo's edges curled slightly from age, but the image was clear. The front porch, the same wooden boards, and the same pair of muddy shoes on someone's feet, child-sized. But Jacob had never returned home. That porch had been undisturbed for 18 years. The message written at the bottom, "I was here," felt like a whisper that came too late or far too soon. At 7:14 a.m., Claire called Charlotte. "We're going back," she said. Charlotte didn't hesitate. "Tell me when." They returned to Camp Larkspur that afternoon. Charlotte had driven down from Seattle that morning, her face drawn but determined. She carried a worn, leather-bound notebook, her old camp journal, and the drawing she'd received in the mail. Claire parked at the edge of the old mess hall. Charlotte stood still, staring at the skeleton of the place. "I remember this," she said. "It smelled like syrup and mud." They moved toward the cabins, weeds clawing at their ankles, birds scattered overhead. Thomas Hale met them near the counselor's cabin. He looked older than before. Not physically, but like something behind his eyes had cracked open. "I've been through the logs again," he said, "and I found something." He handed Claire a printout, the 2005 camp roster. "Jacob's name is on it," he said, "but so is another kid who was marked present and never actually arrived." Claire read the name aloud. "Ryan Cole?" Charlotte flinched. "I knew him," she said. "He was supposed to be in our group. Except his parents pulled him 2 days before camp started. He never came, but the roll call marked him as present every day." Claire's voice dropped. "You think someone used that name to cover a space?" "I think someone wanted it to look like every child was accounted for," Thomas said, "even when one wasn't." They stood in silence. Then Charlotte spoke. "There's a cellar beneath the arts and crafts cabin. No one ever used it. They said it was flooded. But Jacob asked me once if I thought someone could live down there." Claire's heart sank. "Why didn't you say anything back then?" Charlotte's voice broke. "I did, but no one believed me." The entrance to the cellar was behind the collapsed structure. Thomas pried open the hatch. The hinges groaned. A foul, damp smell rose. They climbed down carefully. Claire's flashlight swept across the space. Wooden beams, rusted tools, rotted crates. But in one corner, almost hidden behind a false panel, they found it. A blanket, torn, faded blue, and a notebook. Claire picked it up with trembling hands. It was damp, warped, but some of the writing remained, scrawled in uneven letters over and over again. "I am not alone. He is coming back. Don't sleep near the door. The whistle doesn't scare him. WJD." Claire dropped the notebook. Charlotte gasped, pointing to the far wall. A symbol had been carved into the wood, the same one Jacob used to draw. A circle with an X inside and 3 dots underneath. Thomas stepped closer. "I've seen this before, not just here. There was a carving like this found on a pine tree, up near Pine Drop Hollow." Claire's chest tightened. He was trying to lead us somewhere. Or warn us. They returned to town, shaken and... That night, Claire drove alone to visit someone she hadn't spoken to in 17 years. Lila Spencer, the original detective on Jacob's, now retired, living in a modest house on the edge of Ashland. Her hair had gone fully gray. A cane rested by the door, but her eyes were alert. "I was wondering when you'd come," Lila said. Claire sat down on the porch. "Did you know?" Lila sighed. "I knew something wasn't right, but they pulled me off the case 2 days in." "Why?" "I pushed too hard on the camp director, Ethan Rourke. Thought he was hiding something." "The next day, I was reassigned." Claire's hands curled into fists. "He's a pastor now." "Yeah," Lila said, "with a lot of friends in high places." "Did you ever confront him?" Lila nodded slowly. "I did, years later. He said something I never forgot." "What?" He said, "Some kids get lost, others get found by the wrong person." Claire felt her throat tighten. "Do you think he's involved?" she whispered. "I think he knows who is." The next day, Claire visited Ethan Rourke at his small church on the edge of town. He greeted her with a strained smile. "Claire," he said, "it's been so long." "I found Jacob's bracelet," she said coldly. "Near the trail they told me not to search. I don't know what to tell you. I grieved him, too." "Then why was a child registered under a fake name? Why was the cellar locked from the outside?" He didn't answer. "I want to show you something," Claire said. She handed him the photo of the shoes and the Polaroid. Ethan stared at it, and for the first time, he blinked. "Where did you get this?" Claire's voice was steel. "You tell me." He sat down hard, then said quietly, "I didn't know about the shoes." Claire narrowed her eyes. "But you know something." Ethan swallowed. "There was a man, hired by one of the donors. He wasn't staff. Said he was doing maintenance checks, no ID. Just showed up that last week." Claire's pulse raced. "What did he look like?" Ethan shook his head. "Tall, thin, wore a black coat. Didn't talk to anyone. I assumed he was from the Forest Service." Claire's voice was hollow. "He wasn't." Ethan looked up and whispered, "I think he took Jacob." Back at home, Claire tore through Jacob's old sketchbooks. In one of them she found something she hadn't noticed before, a drawing, a cabin, a circle of stones, a red X on the roof, and a single line of text written below it in clumsy handwriting. "I'll leave it where the fire dies." She froze. It wasn't a drawing. It was a message. She called Thomas. "I think I know where he went." They drove to the old fire ring behind the camp's performance stage. The ring was barely visible now, covered in moss. Claire got down on her knees. She brushed aside sticks, dirt. Then her hand hit something solid, wood. She dug with her fingers, heart racing. A box. She pulled it out. Inside, wrapped in plastic, a VHS tape, labeled in Sharpie, July 31st, 2005. Evening. They stared at it. Thomas whispered, "We need to find a way to play this." That night, Thomas used an old player stored in the Forest Service's maintenance office. The image flickered to life on the small monitor. Static, then blurry footage. A boy, Jacob, sitting near the fire ring, smiling, holding the blue whistle. Someone was filming him from a distance. Then the camera tilted and focused on someone stepping out of the trees. Tall, black coat. Jacob turned, and the footage cut to static. Claire gasped. "Whoever had this—" "They taped him. They followed him." Thomas said nothing, then rewound. Paused. On the edge of the screen, barely visible, another shape. A second child, smaller, standing in shadow, watching. Claire blinked, tears blurring the screen. "There was someone else," she whispered. "Another child, watching." Thomas's voice was low. "Maybe not all of them were taken. Maybe one came back." Claire stood. "If that's true—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the idea was planted. Jacob hadn't vanished alone. And maybe, just maybe, someone who was there could finally tell the truth. At 3:02 a.m., Charlotte woke with a scream. Something was at her motel window. She stepped slowly to the curtain and peeled it back. On the outside of the glass, pressed against it, was a muddy handprint. Small. Too small. And on the bed, beside her journal, lay a folded paper, a trail map, marked with a new symbol, not an X, but a circle and 3 dots. Claire hadn't cried in years the way she cried now. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was quiet, thick, like her body had forgotten how to weep properly. Her hands trembled as she set down the VHS tape, the one that showed Jacob, the fire ring, and the black-coated figure stepping out of the trees, and in the blurry edge of the frame, a second child, watching. Thomas paced the ranger station office in silence. Charlotte sat on the edge of a folding chair, pale, gripping her old camp journal like a lifeline. "We need to know who that other child was," Claire said. Thomas looked up. "Or is—" Claire met his eyes. "You think someone came back?" "I think someone never left. They returned to the fire ring at dawn." Claire scanned the tree line with new eyes. What if Jacob had left more than messages? What if he had left someone behind? Charlotte walked a slow circle around the fire pit, then stopped. "Look." Buried in the ground, half covered in leaves, was a rusted tin box. Inside a drawing, folded carefully. It showed two stick figures, one labeled J, the other M. There was no other context, but between them, a line, a dotted trail. Charlotte whispered, Jacob wasn't alone. They took the drawing to Lila Spencer. The retired detective studied it in silence. "M," she said. "What if it's a name?" Thomas nodded. "Initial." Claire's mind raced. "I have the original camp forms. There were 31 campers that week. We counted them all." "But one," Lila interrupted, "was fake. Ryan Cole." "Right," Claire said, "which brings us to 30. Charlotte opened her journal. There was a girl in our bunk who didn't talk, small, never played with anyone. She left before the search started. The counselors said she had a fever. What was her name? Charlotte paused. Mara Jennings. Claire's stomach turned. Thomas stood. That's our M. They found Mara Jennings 3 hours later. She lived in a foster home outside of Eugene, Oregon. Her file revealed a long history of mental health interventions, dissociation, recurring nightmares, refusal to speak about the woods. Her records had been sealed for years. Now 27, Mara worked the night shift at a gas station. When Claire and Thomas approached her, "I knew you'd come," Mara said. She invited them to the back room, where she kept a locked tin under her bed. Inside, a bracelet, beads, blue, white, and red, identical to Jacob's. She placed it in Claire's hand without a word. Claire fought to breathe. Mara looked her in the eyes. "He gave it to me." "When?" Claire whispered. "The night he told me to run." Mara didn't remember everything, not clearly. She described a cabin deep in the forest, far from the main camp. "He called it the hiding place." "There was someone else there," she whispered. "A man. He told us to be quiet, that no one was looking for us." She spoke of being taken from her cabin, of being led through the woods by someone with a flashlight. Not a counselor, not a ranger, a stranger. "He knew our names," she said, "but we never saw his face, just the coat." Claire asked, "What happened to Jacob?" Mara's eyes filled. "He stayed, so I could leave." She pulled out one more item, a page torn from a yearbook. It was from Camp Larkspur, 2005, staff photo. Claire froze. In the back row, between two smiling counselors, stood a man in a black coat. No name tag, just a shadow of a man. Thomas squinted. "I know that face." Claire stared at the image. The chin. She reached into her bag and pulled out the Polaroid, the shoes on her porch. The porch boards matched. So did the figure in the reflection on the glass. Same eyes, same coat, same man. They took the photo to Lila. She didn't hesitate. "His name is Michael Granger," she said. "Worked security detail for a private donor who funded Larkspur's expansion. But he was never officially on payroll. No ID, no employee records." Claire whispered, "A ghost." Lila nodded. "He disappeared 6 days after Jacob, moved east, changed his name." "How do you know all this?" Lila's jaw tightened. "Because I tracked him, and no one listened." "The man who took Jacob was never a stranger to the investigation. He was hired, protected, and erased by the same donor who funded the camp and pressured the police to shut down the search early. His name, Harlan Brecht, a real estate magnate from Salem. He had 2 sons. One died at age 10. The other, Michael Granger, born Michael Brecht. He funded Camp Larkspur in exchange for privacy and special access. Lila found out and was silenced. They found Granger living in Northern California, going by the name Paul Miller. Claire insisted on going. When they confronted him outside his hardware shop, he didn't run. He stared at Claire for a long time, then said, "He said you'd come." Claire's legs nearly gave out. "Jacob?" "I never hurt him. He was different. He knew how to survive." Thomas pushed forward. "Where is he?" Granger looked away. "I don't know anymore. He left me." "You took him. I saved him from the others. You think I was the worst one?" he said. "They wanted more than just a child. They wanted silence." He handed Claire an old object, a key carved into it, W. Shady. She recognized it. It had been Jacob's, for his toy lock. "Where did he go?" Claire asked. Granger's eyes glistened. "Back to the woods." Then he turned and walked into the store and locked the door. Moments later, they heard the back exit open, and he vanished again. Claire stared at the key. What could it open now? A box? A door? Or something buried long ago? Thomas whispered, "There's one place we haven't looked." Claire turned to him. Jacob's hideout. They returned to the forest one last time, guided by Mara's memory. Jacob's drawing, the path marked by the red X and the dotted line. It took hours, but they found it. Behind a wall of fallen trees, inside a shallow cave, was a wooden crate. The lock was intact. Claire inserted the key. It clicked inside a journal written in Jacob's hand, dated July 29th to August 3rd, 2005. Last entry. "If you find this, I'm not afraid anymore. I helped her escape. If I don't come back, it's because I want you to know what happened, so it never happens again. Love, Jacob." Claire collapsed to her knees, tears falling onto the pages. Thomas turned away. Charlotte just stood in silence. Inside the box were more items. The original drawing with the red X, a flashlight, a Polaroid photo of Mara, smiling, and one last item, a cassette tape. Labeled, "Tell Her I Remember." They played the tape that night. It was Jacob's voice, younger, unsteady, but unmistakable. "Hi, Mom. I hope you're the one hearing this. I don't know if I'll make it out, but I wanted you to know. I tried to do the right thing. I didn't run. I hid, so they wouldn't hurt her. I know you still write to me. I still hear you. I love you." Claire broke. She fell forward into her own arms, the sound of his voice filling the room after 18 silent years. Charlotte wept quietly beside her. Thomas stepped outside, and Mara, watching from the hallway, said only one thing. "He kept me alive." The last frame of Jacob's journal had one line, written on a torn page, as if added later. "Don't look for me at home. Look where the trees have no name." Beneath the line, a symbol, a circle, an X, and 3 dots, and carved into the inside of the box lid, "One of us survived." Claire stood at the edge of the clearing, holding the cassette in one hand, the bracelet in the other. The forest was silent except for the distant rustling of leaves. It wasn't raining, but the air was thick, the kind that made you swallow twice just to breathe right. They had returned to Jacob's hideout one last time. Mara stood a few steps behind her. She didn't say much anymore. Since the journal, since the tape, something had changed in her. She had started leaving drawings in trees, symbols etched on stones, not for others, but for a ritual of remembering. Charlotte had stayed in Ashland, the motel room, the nightmares, the map under the pillow. She couldn't go back yet. She told Claire, "Some part of me never left that camp." Claire understood. Thomas Hale waited near the truck. He had offered to go with her, but Claire refused. She had to do this alone. She stepped into the clearing, the same one from Jacob's drawing, the same one from the tape. And there it was, a tree stump, weathered, scarred. She knelt beside it and opened her palm. The bracelet still smelled faintly of earth. She ran her fingers over each bead, blue, white, red. The red one was chipped now, like it had been bitten once, long ago. Jacob used to chew on things when he was nervous. She smiled through tears. "I found you," she whispered, "not your body, but your voice, your drawings, your fear, your love." She placed the bracelet on the stump, and then from the folds of her jacket she pulled out the letter, the last one, written the night before. "Jacob, I'm not here to bring you back. I'm here to tell you I'm okay. I forgive the silence. I forgive the hiding. If you're still out there, and I believe you are, I just want you to know you were never lost to me. Not for a second. You live in every Sunday morning, in every cup of coffee, in every quiet night. You're not missing. You're carried, always. Love, Mom." She folded it, tucked it under the bracelet, and stood. The wind moved through the trees gently, as if listening. She stepped back, took one long look, and turned to leave. Then she froze, because tucked in the bark of the tree was a folded piece of paper, fresh, white, dried despite the damp. With shaking fingers she pulled it free and opened it. Inside, a single Polaroid, a tree, this stump, and standing beside it, just barely visible in the shadow, was a figure. Tall, slender, wearing a hoodie, head bowed, face turned away. And beneath it, in handwriting she hadn't seen in almost 2 decades, "I was never far." Her knees gave out. She sank to the earth, tears breaking from a place so deep it had no bottom. He had been there, maybe days ago, maybe hours, and he knew she had come. That night, Claire lit a candle in Jacob's room. The lava lamp still glowed. The air smelled of memory, crayons, old bedsheets, soft dust. She placed the Polaroid beside his photo. No one else needed to see it. Not yet. This was hers. Mara moved in the next week. The two didn't talk about Jacob often. They didn't need to. Sometimes grief didn't need a name. It just needed company. Mara brought drawings. Claire made tea. They sat by the window and listened to the wind. Hurry, weeks later, Claire got a postcard. No return address, no message, just a drawing on the front, a circle, an X and 3 dots, and this time, beneath it, a heart. The forest had gone quiet, not silent, not quite, but quiet in the kind of way that made people stop walking. Claire knew that sound now. It didn't scare her anymore. It didn't pull at the part of her that used to ache every time the trees breathed. Now it simply was. 3 months had passed. Autumn had come again, just as it did 18 years ago. The same red-gold leaves falling across the same old porch. The same chill through the window just before dawn. The same town, pretending nothing ever happened, pretending no ghosts walked its tree lines. But Claire wasn't pretending anymore. She had stopped writing letters, not but because she no longer needed words to reach him. He had heard her. And somehow, somewhere, he had spoken back. The Polaroid still sat framed beside his childhood photo. The heart symbol drawn beneath the 3 dots had become a kind of code, silent and perfect. Claire hadn't shown it to anyone else. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't proof. It was a message for her, just her. Sometimes Mara asked her what she would do if Jacob walked through the front door. Claire always answered the same way. "I wouldn't ask why. I'd just be glad he knew the way home." Mara had started drawing again. Full scenes. Forests. Cabins. One in particular showed a boy standing at the edge of the woods, looking back. Not scared, not broken, just quiet. That one Claire hung above the fireplace. Charlotte had returned to Seattle but called often. She said the nightmares had stopped. The handprints on her motel window had never returned, but something had shifted in her, like a knot had finally loosened. Thomas Hale retired. He handed Claire a small envelope before leaving Ashland for good. Inside, a photo of the fire ring clearing taken from a distance. And a note in his sharp, blocky handwriting, "Sometimes we lose a boy, sometimes we find the man he became." Claire kept it in a drawer beside the kitchen sink. There were days when she still walked the old trail. She'd go alone, softly, never calling his name. She didn't need to. The wind knew. So phased and fragile was the edge of memory that she once swore she heard the faintest whistle echo from deep in. It made her smile. She didn't chase it. She let it pass, like breath. One morning, Mara handed her a folded piece of paper. Not a drawing. A map. She'd been sketching in the woods and found an old journal beneath a tree root, its pages too ruined to read, all except one. At the bottom, in childlike scrawl, "The trees with no names are where I'll begin again." Claire traced the letters with her thumb. Mara watched her carefully. Claire nodded. No more searching. Not for him, but maybe for myself. Claire wrote one last letter, not to Jacob. "You did everything you could. You loved him through silence, through darkness, through everything they buried. He is not lost, and neither are you. What you carried was never weight. It was a thread, and you never let go." She didn't seal it. She folded it gently and placed it in the hollow of the tree stump where the bracelet once lay. A breeze moved through the clearing, not cold, just enough. The last time Claire visited the ridge, she brought no photos, no letters, no questions. She only stood still, listened, and smiled. Because sometimes the truth isn't in the finding. It's in the knowing someone was there, and maybe still is, somewhere. Just beyond the rustle of leaves, just behind the breath of trees, just before the silence breaks. And the forest had gone quiet, again. But not silent, not quite.